You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Welcome.
I'm Alex,
I'm Connor.
and today we're going to talk about Star Wars.
As we do from time to time, week to week.
This is an ongoing part of our visual media survey, where we wanted to devote an entire episode to the current flagship show of the Disney Plus Star Wars show lineup, The Mandalorian.
We actually recorded a segment on this episode, but Audacity, our program for recording, had the audacity to delete our footage, which I believe I made that joke in writing before. But it's kind of good because now we're both caught up on season 3, the entirety of The Mandalorian at this point, and we can kind of reflect on the series as a whole.
For those who are unaware, The Mandalorian is a show that follows the adventures of and if you haven't watched The Mandalorian, I'm going to spoil the whole thing for you. So
That's kind of
stop
what we're
now.
doing.
Yeah. But we know that his name now is Din Djarin, the eponymous Mandalorian, and his adventures through the post-imperial landscape of the Outer Rim, from Adventure of the Week episodes to his growing bond with his ward Grogu, who is of the same species of Yoda and Force sensitive, to machinations within Mandalorian society themselves, which at first Din finds himself on the outside of and then embroiled in.
It's celebrated because I believe that visually and narratively it harkens back to what the very first film in the series, A New Hope, reflects. And it's a melting pot of influences ranging from westerns to your wolf and cub type genre. It gets back to this east and west conflux in this lone gunslinging Ronin warrior wandering the galaxy in our character of Din Djarin.
Yeah, so each season sort of explores its own different themes, has its own flow of characters, and ends with different conclusions and in different directions. But throughout, there is this sense of cultural identity and attempting to reclaim it in the wake of having been repressed and colonized for a time by the Empire. Din is part of a fairly extremist or particular or almost fundamentalist sect of Mandalorians, where he does not remove his helmet. He follows what is called the Way, and there are strict rules of behavior governing how he acts and what he does.
And this is an interesting point because if you have seen the Clone Wars, which many of the fans have, but probably not the entirety of the Mandalorian audience, you'll be a little surprised because starting in the Clone Wars and developing in Rebels, we have this different idea of what Mandalorians are. They have a much more, I'd say, non-secretive culture. It might be private, but it's not reclusive like it is by this point in the Mandalorian, which is set 5 years after the defeat of the Empire.
Yeah, the Mandalorian show itself fills in the cultural evolution that Mandalorian culture goes throughout. And we see this all in the Mandalorian show through the eyes of Din Djarin himself, who works as a bounty hunter to start, occasionally working for the New Republic, occasionally working for the Independent Bounties Hunters Guild, and then occasionally taking on side jobs from an Imperial remnant.
And he is, I believe in the development of the show, he's kind of seen as this replacement for Boba Fett. I mean, this could easily have been the Boba Fett show, but I believe, the new Lucasfilm regime was wise in starting from scratch with this new character because we have this blank slate in which to develop a character.
Din Djarin is characterized by his loyalty to his people, by his competence, but not exceptionally so, in that he is, for example, an excellent pilot, a decent hand-to-hand fighter, a good shot, but not a great tactician. So he's a lone gunslinger, but is not all-powerful. He loses as many fights as he wins, and rather than having to rely always just on his own strength like a Jedi might, he uses his environment, his allies, his equipment, and his wits to survive. And it's an attractive trait for Din Djarin that he fails often and then has to seek help and does so. He has pride in his culture, but in himself he is increasingly, if not humble, at least has perspective on his role in the galaxy.
He's also characterized by a hatred of droids because of his upbringing, where he is just a victim of the Clone Wars and an attack by, I believe they're
Super battle droids kill his family before he is brought in as a Mandalorian foundling.
yeah.
So he has this inherent, to start the series, this inherent deep distrust of droids.
Yeah, he's not born of the Mandalorian planet, so he's not Mandalorian by just by the nature of where you're born, but
He's Mandalorian by creed rather than by blood, which is how they put it.
as is Jango Fett. So that is how they've tied Jango Fett and his clone son Boba Fett into that culture as well. But still, Din's specific sect is more extreme. So, where did his particular group form? What are they a subset of?
So Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, for the duration of the series, is a member of the children, or for most of the series. He's cast out and then he returns. Of the Children of the Watch, which are a fundamentalist, I think, reactionary cell to the destruction of Death Watch and the glassing of Mandalore during the Imperial period, where Death Watch themselves are sort of extremist terrorists. Yeah, that's accurate. Who were attempting to force warlike ways back on the Mandalorian people who had tried to become a more peaceful people after centuries of warfare had left their planet almost uninhabitable. But the Children of the Watch, as many cultures do, see that the reason that their culture failed was because they did not hearken back to the old ways. So they see themselves as the true inheritors of the true way of the Mandalore, and so they don't take their helmets off except in private. They follow a strict set of rules and customs, and even to the detriment of their own survival in society, they adhere to their beliefs. They live on dangerous planets. They put their children through tough trials, just by being shown to be entirely attached to their children and human. They have this greater commitment to their culture as a whole. And at first, this is sort of portrayed as a negative thing, because Din, who you like, feels trapped by this own culture, and even when he sees examples of people not ascribing to it in the character of Bo Katan, he reacts like someone who was raised a religious fundamentalist cult does.
Very much radicalists, and it brings up the point again where if you have been tuned into Star Wars, you might not recognize at first that they're this radicalist, cultist group of Mandalorians. If you're dropping in just from watching the movies, you're like, oh, this is the Boba Fett people, and you're like, oh, they don't take their masks off, and then it's a fresh starting point either way, whether you're a true blue in the jeans Star Wars fan, or you're like, hey, I've got Disney Plus and I'm interested in joining in, because I say that because it seems like The Mandalorian is this, like you were saying, front runner in terms of this is what Star Wars is proudest of as far as their flagship series goes.
Yeah, The Mandalorian is certainly playing in the populist space where Din Djarin is cool. He's got lots of appeal and he explores a wide range of the Star Wars universe. He flies around in his ship. He basically adopts Grogu, which we'll get to the character of Grogu in a moment. But he's also this vehicle by which we see a post-imperial society, from the retired New Republic Rangers who don't quite fit into the weak central government that leaves the fringes of space dangerous, to the travails of our main character, who is part of a culture that went very insular and isolationist, and how he reconciles that with the cosmopolitan friends that he makes out in the broader galaxy.
And the episodic nature of the show helps to explore all of these different angles of the galaxy where it stands, because while there's definitely a through line for each season, it's an episodic show, so we have different planets, we have different groups. What I love is that we get to see the galaxy from the angle of a bounty hunter who is going off of multifarious number of bounties, who he has mostly frozen in carbonite on his ship, which is just a neat gimmick that unfortunately later on they're no longer able to use with the destruction of the Mandalorian's cool ship.
The Razor Crest.
Yes, join us in the future whenever we talk about spaceships and the personality that they can bring a character. So yeah, just being able to see different angles of the seedy underbelly of the galaxy is something that we didn't exactly see in the sequel trilogy. So having this come out just right around the Rise of Skywalker was just a breath of fresh air to have this unexplored region of Star Wars that really, other than the Clone Wars, hasn't been touched since the original trilogy.
One of the benefits of The Mandalorian as a whole is the stakes are very personal and relatively small. Like, we're so worried about the survival of Din Djarin. Will he reunite with Grogu? Will they save the village from the Marauders? There's not this broader question of will the Final Order destroy a dozen planets? Or will the entire galaxy fall into darkness?
Will the Fourth be balanced this time around?
No, we want Din Djarin to be a good dad. We want him to realize that he was indoctrinated or to come to terms with his beliefs need to adapt and grow to a larger galaxy.
We want him to be comfortable and not running all the time.
Yeah, which we get to by the end of the third season. He finds a home with himself and his family, which is heartwarming. We see the culture he's part of, with his help, realizing that they need to adapt and change to be once more part of a greater community, rather than having isolated themselves and alienating all their potential allies. And he is part of that voice of reason. And we see Din Djarin used as a vehicle to explore these other interesting characters from the planet of Navarro, which is an independent system sort of ignored by the New Republic that's trying to eke its own way in the galaxy, to meeting with Ahsoka Tano and seeing how utterly outclassed the average person, even a competent in the 99th percentile warrior like Din Djarin, maybe a great soldier he is not, but a great warrior he is, and just how Ahsoka Tano could have easily killed him with little effort. And just how and what does fatherhood and family mean in a galaxy torn apart by war, where there's still war orphans and trauma lingering around every corner.
So in kind of focusing on where each of the seasons take his arc, we are introduced to the character of Grogu, which is one of the first bounties that we see that he's associated with. He has to reclaim the target. I can't exactly remember what they refer to the child as.
So he's called the Child until we learn his name in the second season, but we're going to refer to Grogu. He is the same species as Yoda. He is a small green child who is powerful in the Force and is a survivor of Order 66, who has basically been cut off from the Force and isolated and deeply traumatized for the past 20 years. And then is sought by the Imperial Remnant for their cloning. As discussed in our previous episode on cloning, Grogu powerful in the Force, and so they wanted to isolate his Force-sensitive genes for cloning reasons. So Din Djarin rescues him, realizes he's going to be subjected to experiments, and decides he cannot bear to have a child be turned over to his employer, and so goes to rescue Grogu, and they are fairly inseparable after that, despite having a hard time communicating, and each of them having their own traumas to overcome.
And at this point, he's kind of on the outs, because he's stolen this child that the Imperial Remnant wants. He has this bounty, which needs to be turned in. And I think even the Mandalorians are unhappy that he's sort of breaking with code at this point, right?
By freeing the child, he has taken on responsibility for Grogu. And so according to the Mandalorians, he must find a Jedi to return Grogu to, because Grogu is obviously Force sensitive. Din Djarin doesn't even know who Jedi are. I mean, he's been raised in a cult for, should I call them a cult? Raised in an isolationist fundamentalist religious commune for his entire life. And so doesn't even know really who Jedi are, and then is told that they are powerful sorcerers. And so his quest for a long time is to reunite Grogu with a Jedi.
And it's what really drives him for the first 2 seasons. And it's, I think, at the end of the first season that he begins to form attachments after a series of adventures with, we have, as you said, the previous Ranger,
Cara Dune.
Yes, with some great Seven Samurai inspired, let's protect the city, let's raise the town up to defend itself.
Yeah, so
there's a great bottle episode in a series of hallways that are all the same as set, where there is the actor Bill Burr portraying that's a rapscallion. There are these slight moments where we have just areas of adventure, of excitement. It's everything that the Clone Wars portrays in its episodic nature, but in fewer episodes because live action is more expensive than doing something purely with computer animation.
Yeah, and every season is using Din Djarin as a vehicle to explore. Here's how the New Republic is, and as we talked about the planet Navarro, but also here's how he interacts with other criminals. Here's how someone with a sense of personal honor tries to survive in a galaxy where that means increasingly less. And he doesn't exactly have the best social skills to survive. He's got this prejudice against droids, but he speaks the Tusken language and is able to communicate with them on Tatooine, while at the same time being racist against Jawas and wanting to kill them with a flamethrower. So he's a person with a lot of preconceptions that he has to overcome. But he has this, but he's there for his friends. And so by comparing season 1 Din Djarin, who is just decapitates someone to make a point, to the end of season 3 Din Djarin, who is able to successfully appeal to a New Republic Ranger, 2 factions of Mandalorians, and his own adopted son for help in retaking his planet, you can see his growth as a person. And ultimately, The Mandalorian is both the story of adventures across the galaxy, but also Din Djarin's growth as a person in subtle, small, but increasing ways as he accepts his role among his people, the parts of his people's philosophy he agrees with and what he doesn't, and taking on his own identity as a leader, as a follower, and as a father.
It's beautiful to see. It's a different kind of story for the most part. When we talk about our Wolf and Cub episode, I will be a little more harsh. But this is one of the first cases of that lone warrior with a young, just valuable child that he needs to protect and grows attached to. And by the end of season 1, you have Din start to lose some of that racism towards droids. He sees that they can be self-sacrificing. We see him grow as a father, and as season 2 goes on, if I have any qualms with the show, they are here, wherein there are so many moments of, hey, there's a cameo. It's like, hey, there's a cameo. It no longer becomes that precious in a marathon viewing. If you have there's Jango Fett, Ahsoka, and Luke Skywalker, and they all just kind of appear and they dip out, because that is great. Sometimes that makes you want, it makes you hunger for more of that character. It makes you ask, where's Luke Skywalker during this? Whereas, we get some idea of what he's doing. He's off building his Jedi Temple, but it makes us ask, well, where's Han Solo at this point? Where's Leia at this point? I think the show would be stronger if it were totally separated from some of these more prominent figures that the fans are very adamant about seeing. I don't want to see CGI Mark Hamill's face anymore. I want to see some new characters.
Yeah, I want to see Bo Katan become the Queen of Mandalore again. Mm-hmm. I want to see Din Djarin navigating his complex feelings about being part of a cosmopolitan society. I want to see Grogu wearing a Mandalorian helmet for the first time. Yeah. Does Mandalore make a deal with the New Republic? Do they not? What does this say about the greater galaxy as a whole?
I'd say very, very easily, if incorporate Ahsoka Tano. If you want to make her the strong character of the show, great. Have her take Grogu. Have her be the character that Din has to interact with. Maybe give us one episode of Luke in that Boba Fett show where we see him interact and bring some insight. I don't know. That would be one way just to tighten things up more, because it dilutes the series a little bit when we don't have Din Djarin as that through-line character who has more of the prominence. That's my one issue with what's happened with the show.
And I think that season 2 is the worst offender. Season 3 is a tighter story. And we can't finish our discussion about The Mandalorian without talking about its antagonists. Mm-hmm. The primary antagonist being Moff Gideon, as portrayed by the always chilling Giancarlo Esposito.
He's used in a very limited way. I think he only shows up within maybe an episode and a fifth within each season.
Yeah, but his power and his malignity are present throughout, in that he is the driving force behind many of the bad things that befall Din Djarin. Um, and he's evil, unquestionably, and he commits to it. He is not. He doesn't really have a lot of like greater ideological underpinnings like some other ex-imperials might have. Nor does he have any great loyalty to the previous empire. He is a warlord creating his own power base unapologetically. And it is great to see that kind of world building in the post-Empire area. He's part of the Shadow Council that is trying to hold together some kind of ex-Imperial alliance in the wake of the rise of the New Republic. But Moff Gideon is doing his own thing. He's one of the more powerful warlords. He's trying to claim Mandalore as his own. He has his own troopers using Beskar armor. He attempted to use Beskar to make Death Troopers, which were droid troopers that the only force that was able to defeat them was a fully realized Jedi in the form of Luke Skywalker.
I have to retract just a little bit. That was the coolest fucking thing that ever happened, period. Narratively, it's just one of those hats on a hat situation. Like, the Mandalorian is already so cool. It's already so well developed, and I don't need Luke Skywalker in it. That's just me. No one can pick apart Star Wars like a Star Wars fan, but sorry, I should derail that, but
yeah. So the character of Moff Gideon, we have other smaller antagonists who show up, other petty criminals and warlords and bounties, but the only really through thread antagonist throughout the whole Mandalorian is Moff Gideon, as well as some of his more prominent servants or underlings.
And he's definitely poised to potentially, become the next ruler of the Empire if it weren't for his hubris.
Well, and I don't think he's in on he was supposed to be gathering some cloning resources for Palpatine and keeps them to himself. So, but he is definitely, I'm not sure he's aware. He is aware of Operation Necromancer, which is quite openly the attempt to resurrect Palpatine, as discussed in Season 3.
Ran by Brendel Hux, the father of
Armitage Hux.
There we go.
Yeah, and Brendel Hux is also in charge of indoctrinating the new First Order Stormtrooper Corps using his brainwashing program with the help of Captain Cardinal and Captain Phasma. So, we see all these little pieces of the First Order starting to appear. This is the Season 2 of The Mandalorian. It takes place 9 years after the fall of the Empire. So we're firmly in territory where the New Republic is in control of the galaxy, and we're starting to see its positives and its inefficiencies, where it's desperate to not be the Empire, and in so doing becomes relatively ineffective, well-meaning but weak.
And I would say that the format of The Mandalorian as we know it takes a shift, but it actually doesn't, because we get about 2 episodes of the Book of Boba Fett, maybe 1.5 episodes of the Book of Boba Fett that focus entirely on Din Djarin. And at the end of Season 2, we have Din make another step forward in his growth by separating himself from this son figure that he's grown attached to, and he lets Grogu go with Luke Skywalker to train. The Book of Boba Fett unwrites that in 2 episodes, where first we have Din returning to what's left of the
Children of the Watch.
The Children of the Watch.
And their new covert.
Right, and it's just the armorer, and it's just I think Pre Vizsla.
Pre Vizsla, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's the conflict where, Din has this darksaber. Pre Vizsla wants the darksaber because it belongs to his clan. Its clan earned it, and you can rule the entire, people of Mandalore by claiming it through battle. But the armorer stops them because Din Djarin's not a true Mandalorian anymore, because he took his helmet off in the 2nd season. And this makes him decide, you know what, well, I have to go to the waters of Mandalore to become anointed again. I'm just going to get Grogu back, because I miss him. And so we get that episode with Luke Skywalker. We get some great teachings. We have some discussion between Din and Ahsoka in regards to what it means to be a Jedi and what it means to be attached.
And I think we start to see the seeds of the reason Luke ultimately failed as a new Jedi Grandmaster, in that he was desperately trying to remake the Jedi Order as it was, which was full of flaws, rather than making a new Jedi Order as the galaxy was and needed. Not that Luke wasn't well-meaning, and not that it could have not succeeded, but we do see him backwards looking into what the Jedi of old did and lionizing them a little bit, which is what then Yoda chides him about in The Last Jedi, saying, yes, the ancients were wise and powerful, but also a little bit out of touch, and you need to do your own thing. You've taught your student, and now you must trust that she will do what she can in the galaxy within which she lives. And so you see him not having that realization in the way he's teaching Grogu, where he certainly is supportive of Grogu, allows him to leave, and that's probably the right decision. But there's this undercurrent of, you must choose now, tiny 50-year-old child.
A little dogmatic in his view. And
Dogmatic. Dogma is definitely an ongoing theme of The Mandalorian. When is it good? When is it bad? It's often bad. Who sticks to it and why? Why do people want that kind of structure in their lives, and what does it give to them?
And that leads us to that shift I was referring to with the season 3, where yes, it is an episodic program, but the focus of what The Mandalorian is opens its scope to not just Din, but an entire people, and specifically Bo Katan, who was a major figure in previous Star Wars lore, ranging from the Clone Wars to Rebels. She shows up in season 2, and she is the co-lead of season 3, where it's her redemption to become ruler of Mandalore again.
Yeah, really, she's the protagonist of season 3 of The Mandalorian, whereas Grogu is there as the ward and as is going through his own character development, but where Bo Katan accepting that she can be among her people again, and that her previous failures have not made her unfit to be a leader of her people. And we certainly see that she's a more competent tactician than Din Djarin. Din Djarin is very happy to have someone who's like, I am a very good pilot and good at fighting. Tell me where to go and who to kill.
I'm a quick draw. I don't plan things out.
Like, I will plan an attack on a cruiser, but you're trying to wage a campaign. Lady Bo-Katan, tell me what to do. And she,
like, I just want to sit down. Like, that's all I want to do.
Is my son safe? Do I have my armor? Do my people like me again? And are my people making the right decision? So we see Din Djarin much more comfortable with himself once he even rejoins his people. And we also see the fact that he leaves and comes back and goes through that process also changing his people inherently. He broke their rules, and then by the letter of the law, then did what he needed to do to follow their religion. But we also see the armorer character softening and admitting that their way cannot be the only way.
Which they need to grow, develop, and unify in hopes of surviving as a culture.
Which, before that happened, I was on the train that they were a dangerous cult that was not going to adapt and evolve, and that Din Djarin needed to outgrow. But they adapted by growing with him, and so showing how a collection of voices that can all be heard in Mandalorian society would be necessary, not just the one sect seeing themselves as the only true Mandalorians, which is how Mandalorian culture has gone for millennia. And has never worked out for them once.
It also softens Bo's former people. Were those Death Watch, technically, or are they just...
for Axe Woves and the rest?
Yeah.
So they were part of her own clan. Some of them were Night Owls. I'm not quite sure. I think some of them are just survivors of other factions. But we get survivors from the surface of Mandalore.
And they're mercenary types. We see that in... Bo-Katan's behavior in season 2, where she has her followers there, and then Axe Woves has taken her entire people, her fleet, and they're mercenaries. They're sellswords, and Din Djarin and Bo-Katan bring them back into the fold, and the Zionists teach them the importance of culture, the importance of family, and There's this mutual growth, and then the survivors of the actual planet of Mandalore get food and
and they're like,
warmth.
yeah, you guys are out there like arguing about who should be wearing their helmet or not. We've been on the surface of our home planet surviving for decades.
And the visual aesthetic amongst all of them is so rad because I would say that the Children of the Watch are your typical Boba Fett looking ones where they're battle weary and they're scuffed up and
They're all unique. They're more of like a barbarian warrior culture where everyone has their own little trophies and their own little customizations. The Night Owls and Bo Katan's people are more of a military unit.
Yes,
like
unified.
They have a uniform. They wear the same colors, and then you have like the guerrilla fighters that were remaining on the planet of Mandalore. Children of the Watch are still a culture, and it's a cultural connotation. Then the mother was the father of necessity was the mother of invention for the people on the surface of Mandalore, where they just needed to scrape together what they could to survive while trying to overcome their shame. And just the depth of the exploration of Mandalorian culture in season 3, I think, is one of its more interesting parts and its more powerful pieces, because it takes what had been a fairly binary view in the earlier seasons and makes it more nuanced.
And yet it still accomplishes that without feeling out of touch with what the Mandalorian show was. We have this episodic nature where we have different facets of the culture explored, where we still have different areas of the galaxy explored. We have a near comedic episode where Jack Black and Lizzo trip their way through lines, but we have the great Christopher Lloyd showing up as this separatist loyalist.
CSI Mandalorian, and it also does what Star Wars does really well, in that it tracks through these various genres while using its setting as its tool. We have a survival horror episode, Crashed on the Ice Spider Planet. We have a Defend the Village from the Raiders, Seven Samurai episode. We have high politics in the form of the New Republic. We have gunslinging adventures. We have family drama. We have politics. We have Western Great Hunt with the Natives episode with the Tuskens. And so, and I've often heard the Mandalorian described as Din Djarin is the only character in Star Wars who doesn't realize he's in Star Wars. So he takes everything at face value and is always surprised when things happen to him, but is just trying his best. He's a simple, like Jango Fett before him, he's just a simple man in the universe trying to make his way.
And before talking about the ultimate end, I wanted to ask again about Moff Gideon and his ultimate demise. Because there's a mustache-twirling moment when he says, I had a perfect set of Force-sensitive clones and they're all gone! And this is 2 seconds after they were just all destroyed, and that was basically, 30 minutes after they were introduced. And I emphasize mustache-twirling because this Moff Gideon does not have a mustache. Is he also a clone? And is the real Gideon out there?
Or could a clone Gideon show up again, but with, as we've discussed in our episode on cloning, an entirely different outlook and set of motivations? As we've established, clones, while they can be programmed and are susceptible to brainwashing, are their own individuals, unless you're Palpatine and use your Force apparition mind-casting powers to forcibly take over a half-baked clone. So could a version of Gideon who is not necessarily an antagonist show up in the future? Was the antagonist Gideon just a brainwashed clone? I guess we'll have to see in the future. I would never say no to more Giancarlo Esposito, but I am leaning more towards wanting more like, I'm the clone of Moff Gideon, but I'm not Gideon. Call me Gerard, and okay, can we be friends?
I have all of his memories, and, I will help you.
Yeah. Sort of almost playing in the same space as the character of Grunt in Mass Effect, where bred to be this cloned super soldier, but instead just wants to do his own thing.
So that leads us to the end, where I'm very curious if this is the end of the Mandalorian. We have Bo Katan, who has, reclaimed her people and her planet, her culture, and we have Din Djarin, who is sort of sitting down with his homestead and his ward, who is
his son.
His son.
Adopted him as Grogu
that's very true. He becomes Din Grogu, which breaks naming convention. I don't care. It's whatever Din Djarin's culture is, can have whatever naming convention they want. So people are mad because, Boba Fett is the son of Jango Fett, so it should be Grogu Djarin. But
No, but Din kept the name from his parents,
yeah.
and he goes by Din. No one calls him Djarin. Most people call him Mando.
Hmm.
So I think it's still name is Grogu, and
Mhm.
names can be weird in Star Wars.
Yeah,
Let it be
doesn't
weird,
matter.
everybody.
Yeah. But it's a beautiful ending on his character, and I know that there is a Mandalorian movie coming out, and it's just been called that because this is the Mandalorian era. There have been a lot of shows that kind of swim around this period. We have the Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka. There's an upcoming show called Skeleton Crew, which is about a former Jedi and a group of kids trying to not die in the galaxy. They're all set in this era, and the capstone movie is going to be this Mandalorian film, which many people posit as being Ahsoka Tano facing Grand Admiral Thrawn returning from the unknown regions. And
Though we still need to make sure that Grand Admiral Thrawn is going to be the antagonist because
right.
he was never quite that loyal to the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And as the novels about him reveal, he has his own motivations. But if those motivations contradict with our heroes at all, he will be an enemy.
Mm-hmm. And who knows? Who knows if he's going to unify the Imperial remnants? If he's going to get the Brotherhood together? If we don't know yet, but I'm very curious to see what that's going to be and how Din Djarin is going to play a part. But really, the only other thread that's not tied up by the end of Mandalorian season 3 is the mythosaur that Bo Katan sees underneath the waters. So it's whoever can tame the mythosaur, I don't know, gets the prize. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's there are myths and legends about taming this beast. Grogu is shown to be able to tame great creatures, so that's something that has been unseen, but otherwise I feel pretty narratively set as far as The Mandalorian goes. How about you?
Yeah, if it ended here, I would be fine. If we just see the characters show up again, I would be good. Grogu has more of my interest now, seeing where he goes in the future. If we don't see him around at all in the sequel trilogy, he'd still be relatively young by that point.
Mm-hmm. Only 100 years old instead of 50?
80 years old or
Mm-hmm.
so. But what I wanted to then close the episode out is with the rest of our visual media, who's this for and who should watch it?
Oh, that's a great point. I really see this as if you're a fan of Star Wars, it's for you. And if you're not a fan of Star Wars, you should watch it just to see if it catches your interest.
Yeah, the Mandalorian season 1 is one of those gateway things where if you want to get someone into Star Wars and they haven't watched anything, you could start them with A New Hope and that might catch their interest. But you could also try the Mandalorian, and they want to know the context of what are these helmets outside the cantina, and why are all these Imperials hiding at the back of a bar, and who are these people with these blasters and these helmets? Well, it's like, well, do I have a world to introduce to you?
Who's this weird priest with a green laser sword just killing all these robots?
Yeah. So really, in terms of broad appeal, The Mandalorian is probably at the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
You do not need to have watched any Star Wars other than maybe the movies to really get most of what you need out of The Mandalorian. If you have also watched the Clone Wars and Rebels, it is taking characters and things from that, particularly with the Mandalorians, the Darksaber, and so on.
Ahsoka Tano in general.
Yes. But this also appears to be fairly required viewing, perhaps for the Ahsoka show. So really, The Mandalorian's for everyone. Everyone should go watch it. It is the broadest appeal of any Star Wars show. Does it reach quite the heights of some of the other shows that we like, like Rebels and the Clone Wars at its peak? Probably not, but every episode of The Mandalorian is fun.
I think it's very representative of. I have yet to finish Rebels, but as far as Clone Wars goes, there are some duds. As far as The Mandalorian goes, there are some moments that I'm like, that's not as driving. I would say it's up there. Andor is probably the tightest Star Wars show. It's a well-oiled machine from beginning to end. There's not a moment that is unnecessary. I would say as the perfect entryway for your general audience, that's going to be The Mandalorian. So I would say, just because the general audience, some people like cartoons, but my mom won't go see a cartoon. She wouldn't go see the new Spider-Verse movie. So she would watch The Mandalorian, though. That's my benchmark for a general audience. It's my 60-year-old mom.
Yeah. So watch The Mandalorian, have other people watch The Mandalorian, and then be ready for the future of Star Wars.
And maybe we'll see a season 4, or maybe we won't. Maybe we'll see a animated series of, what happens with Ben Solo and Luke Skywalker. And I'm going to mention that every episode until it happens, because I believe in manifesting.
Keep glaring at Connor when he does. Right. Well, thank you for joining us for part 6 of our visual media survey. We're almost to the end of all of them, just to let you know what you should watch and what might be for you.
What do we have left? Visions?
Vision Season 2, and then the Ahsoka show coming out soon.
Excellent.
All right, well, thank you for listening today.
Until next time, Star Wars fans.
Next week with more Star Wars.
Until then.